What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Today, we'll be chatting with Adam Armbrecht of Locked On Nets. The Nets seemingly forced to move on from James Harden, dealing him at the NBA trade deadline for a package involving Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond from the Philadelphia 76ers. What does this move mean for the future of the Brooklyn Nets? How will Ben Simmons mesh with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving? But first, a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar, because look, it's that time of year when people start to kind of fade on their New Year's resolutions, right? If you're starting to fade on some dietary restrictions that you've had because of your New Year's resolution, Built Bar can help you power through. They've got so many amazing protein bars. And the best part is, these are protein bars that taste like a candy bar. They're so delicious, covered in amazing chocolate, and the flavors that they have, there's so many great ones to choose from. Strawberry, mint brownie, cookies and cream, peanut butter, my personal favorite, coconut brownie chunk. You can't go wrong with a single bar on their menu. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Great if you're on a keto diet. Great if you're trying to stick true to your New Year's resolutions. And you can check them out. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. Joining us now is one of the hosts of Locked On Nets, Adam Armbrecht, who you can follow on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht. Adam, it happened. James Harden, no longer a member of the Brooklyn Nets. Steve Nash looked into the camera and spoke to all of us in our living rooms and said, "We are not trading James Harden." And yet here we are. Trade deadline has passed. James Harden no longer in Brooklyn. Walk me through your immediate reaction to this deal with Harden on the way out and Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond headed to Brooklyn.
Yeah, listen, that's Steve Nash's job, by the way, as is the head coach and GM's job. It's to kind of lie to the public when something's happening behind the scenes, right? That's the NBA playbook, the coach playbook when these things kind of things happen. Listen, it's the more that you hear about on the back end of how James Harden was feeling in Brooklyn, basically this entire season, it felt like this was an inevitable move that the Brooklyn Nets had to make. Didn't want to make it. Their goal was to have those three superstars, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden, winning a championship for them. But once you get to the place where it looks like you are not going to have one of those superstars fully committed to that process, you have to look around the league and see what's possible. Obviously, Ben Simmons in Philadelphia was a great opportunity because of his circumstances and what he was not enjoying with his current team. So, we said going back to when people debate about how much you give up for James Harden to get him from Houston, is it too much? You make the trade 1,000 times out of 1,000 because you want that elite talent on your team. Likewise, now you make this trade out of necessity, and now you just have to reset yourself to what this team can look like going forward, short and long term.
So does this kind of, in your mind, Adam, does this shift the expectations, at least in the immediate short term, for this Brooklyn Nets team? Because obviously with the big three at the helm, despite, the health issues and just everything going on, the struggles of the Nets, it basically felt like it was championship or bust for that group. Do those expectations get shifted a little bit now, and maybe things being a bit more understanding of, okay, we're bringing in Ben Simmons. Now we've got to kind of acclimate with him and see what's going on. I guess kind of what are the expectations for the rest of this season?
Well, when you're a team that's lost 11 straight and set the first time in NBA history, being a team that was both above 500 and had an 11-game losing streak, obviously it's hard to look at it right now in this moment and say, well, the window hasn't shifted a little bit, right? For the Brooklyn Nets, you've extended your championship window, I think, potentially, because Ben Simmons is under contract on a similar timeline to Kevin Durant, and you can really start to reevaluate how you want to form this team over the next couple of seasons. In the short term, I still stand by the fact that at the latest, we're looking at mid-March for Kevin Durant to come back. You're going to get Seth Curry out there. You're going to get Drummond on there. And then the question is going to be, how long does it take for Ben Simmons to get into basketball shape? When you look at this team, they are going to be more balanced offensively and defensively than they were when you had James Harden. Now, how long does it take for everyone to get on the same page? That's the big question mark. But if you look at the Eastern Conference, this is still going to be a team, even if it's in the 10th seed playing game, that is going to be in the playoffs. And I just do not see a world where Kevin Durant is not going to approach this the same way he did last season. Injuries or otherwise, I'm going to try to take this team to a championship. And I think you have to at least leave the door open to say, depending on how they look together, they are still going to be one of the top threats in the Eastern Conference. I just do not see how you can look at the talent they're going to have and the defensive value that Ben Simmons brings in and say that they are not going to be incredibly difficult out early in the playoffs and certainly be there when it comes to the Eastern Conference Finals and vying for a spot in the championship.
Yeah, the potential fit of Ben Simmons alongside Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, I'll admit it's intriguing, right? On paper, he is arguably a better fit alongside those two stars than James Harden was, because suddenly you have a guy that can just defer to the other two, create for them, doesn't necessarily have to, focus on getting his own, I guess, if that's the way to put it. And then you mentioned his defense, right? What he brings on the other side of the basketball. So are you really intrigued by this potential fit and kind of what the on the court product is ultimately going to look like once you can get all those pieces in place? Not to mention, Seth Curry having another lights out shooter to kind of replace Joe Harris with that kind of question mark surrounding him and whether or not he actually makes it back this season.
Yeah, Ben Simmons, 15-8-8 guy, right? If he can come in and set that type of baseline for himself with the Brooklyn Nets, it's incredibly exciting to get them out there on the court. When Harden was brought in from Houston, Kyrie Irving said, I defer to you. You can be the point guard. I'll play off ball. You run the show. Now, I don't know if that dynamic will be exactly the same once Ben Simmons gets his feet underneath him, but it's good to know that Kyrie Irving is more than willing and capable of allowing Ben Simmons to facilitate a little bit. We know that he likes to do it. We know that he's more than capable of it. The way that it'll look different for Brooklyn now is you're talking about a high-level passer who makes the right basketball decisions, that can work out of the two-man game, the roll to the basket, and then distribute to perimeter shooters. And you can put Kyrie and Kevin Durant in that, but you mentioned them. Patty Mills has been an elite three-point shooter for this team this season. You now add Seth Curry into that mix, and whether or not Joe Harris ever makes it back, the Nets did do this double step of also getting in more shooting value out of this trade. So when you talk about balancing the court, James Harden is not a high-level three-point shooter. He can take them, but he is not a 40% plus shooter from beyond the arc. Seth Curry is. Patty Mills is. We can think about whether or not Kessler still has a small role on the outside here, but all the spacing is going to be more effective there. And then you mentioned the defensive piece of it. The big components for me are, one, we know that you can look across the court and say, Ben Simmons, you go take on the hardest matchup on the other side. That's your job now. But it also has the trickle-down effect of alleviating the pressure on Kevin Durant on the defensive end, the pressure on a young player that's still a part of this roster, and Nick Claxton. And I keep coming back to this after the trade was made. The defensive value of having Ben Simmons and Nicholas Claxton, who are two guys that can switch on almost any assignment, and then telling Kevin Durant, you pick up the third hardest task on the defensive end. It's a lot of length, and it's a lot of switchability that they can utilize on that end of the floor. And I think you'll start to see this team, who in recent weeks has really waned on the defensive end and from a consistency standpoint, now they can lock back into that as being one of their cornerstones and everything that it unleashes on the other end.
Adam, I think given the optics and just kind of how that situation had devolved with James Harden, it feels like the Nets were forced into making this trade. But the more that I think about it, and you can push back on this if you'd like to, I come away thinking that this trade might be a very clear, both sides are going to find a way to win out of this trade. Is that a overstep on my behalf?
No, I looked at it as, so just quickly from the Philly side first, once they get James Harden, they went from having a crack of a championship door this year, maybe, to now you open that door. You have a chance to win a championship this year. You have a chance next year. From the Brooklyn Nets side of it, beyond James Harden not wanting to be a part of this team, seemingly or factually, you also now say, what we're not going to do? Get into signing you to a $55, $60 million a year extension in the offseason. And I think that it's hard for fans of teams. It's hard for Brooklyn Nets fans to look at this and go, what a relief. We won't have to worry about that in the offseason. But it matters. You just extended the value and the window for Kevin Durant and for the Brooklyn Nets to win championships. They'll make adjustments to this roster, but Seth Curry is still under contract next season. Joe Harris's number at least still exists on these books and what he can be, as is Patty Mills, as is a lot of these key pieces. So, yes, in the moment, it's a hard pill to swallow, I think, for Nets fans. Philly fans are incredibly excited at the possibility of this season. But again, talk to me the final day of the NBA season as the playoffs approach, and if anybody is a fan of sports and storylines, you want to see somewhere along the way here a Sixers-Nets matchup in the playoffs.
Oh, that would be the absolute dream scenario for everybody involved. And given the way the standings are looking currently, not an unlikely possibility at this point, as the Nets will hopefully, find their way a little bit, creeping back up into the standings, and then maybe the Sixers find themselves, home court. I don't know. We'll see how it all shakes out. But Adam, when can we expect Simmons, Curry, and Drummond to actually suit up, for the Nets?
The final parting shot for James Harden was waiting 15 minutes after the Saturday night tip-off against the Miami Heat to clear his medical for the Sixers, which prevented Seth Curry being available for the Brooklyn Nets. So Curry and Drummond are going to be ready immediately. They play tonight back at home. That could be an option for them. They're going to be ready. This is the benefit for the Brooklyn Nets when you think about bringing in players is these two guys have been playing meaningful minutes for a team all season long. So they'll be right back into it. There's some speculation that from a Ben Simmons perspective, obviously he's going to need to ramp back up. Kyrie Irving, once he was able to play away games, he stepped onto the court and almost instantly was in form. Now that's unique maybe to Kyrie and his dedication. Some people think that Ben Simmons has been keeping himself in shape. Some people think that the Nets should work really hard to have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, even if it means a road game, on the court together with Ben when he makes his debut. The tricky part is when you look at the schedule, the standings, and the losing streak, at some point the Nets are just going to say, we just need to have the most talented bodies out there on the court to be able to give us a chance to win some ball games here. So short term, I wouldn't expect to see Ben Simmons before the All-Star break, but kind of regardless of what Kevin Durant's timeline is, I think you have to have Ben out there following the All-Star break at the latest because his presence alone can steal you a handful of games. And that's what the Nets are trying to do here until Durant gets back healthy, steal a few wins, keep yourself afloat, and then have that 14, 16 game charge before the playoffs to acclimate to one another and hopefully get yourself in a spot to win some meaningful games in the playoffs.
What will the post-James Harden era Brooklyn Nets look like? The new big three of Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Ben Simmons. You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Nets. Adam, appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Always, man.